Hey, dude! This episode of the Game Over Greggy Show is brought to you by Mac Weldon. Stop dressing like Kevin and start dressing like Tim. I'm so sorry, Kevin. They let me write the ad. That's right! You'll look stylish and hip and not like Mick Foley after he retired. Mac Welding believes in smart design, premium fabrics, and simple shopping. Mac Welding will be the most comfortable underwear, socks, shirts, undershirts, hoodies, and sweatpants that you will ever wear. They have a line of silver underwear and shirts that are naturally antimicrobial, which means they eliminate odor. You don't say it like that, Colin, but you can say whatever. Antimicrobial. Nah. They want you to be comfortable. So if you don't like your first pair, you can keep it, and they'll still refund you, no questions asked. Go to MacWeldon.com and get 20% off using the promo code Greggy. Be a Tim. Don't be a Kevin.
Why?
Because they let me write the ad. Colin, what's your topic?
Hold on, I just wanted to see if this works. Oh wait, hold on, I gotta put the volume up.
You gotta see his movie, Tim.
Dude, I was fucking dying during that scene. I was dying. I couldn't breathe. I was like,
the movie legitimately had, and I hate to use the term, but laugh out loud moments. Like laugh out loud.
Yeah,
yeah, a lot of
Dirty Grandpa, great.
all right, so I wanted to do a quick topic about something specific having to do with, I guess, philosophy in a way.
Sure.
We often talk about, or society at large talks about, well, what should we as a society invest in? And what should we invest in our children with education, for instance? We invest in roads and infrastructure. I was curious specifically if you guys think that society should invest in the humanities, art, and science. And if so, like, to what extent? The reason I ask this question is twofold. One is that I've been playing with this idea recently, not necessarily an unprecedented idea, but the idea that the government could be, we often talk about how running the government like a business, but could the government really be a business? In other words, could the government come and be like, we want to invest $500 billion over 10 years in curing cancer, with the anticipation that we will find some sort of tangible cure that we can then sell
to the rest of the world, sure.
And our American scientists will use American technology to find an American cure for cancer that we can then distribute to the rest of the world and make that money back. In other words, not just a sunken cost of $500 billion, but saying like we can make maybe a few $1 trillion on this.
Yeah.
But maybe it won't work out. The more tangible reason that I bring this up is I tweeted this out the other day because Donald Trump is going after the National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities, which I think is totally ridiculous. NEA, by the way, spends about $500 million a year, which has been spent in the time I've been talking about this by the federal government. So just no money at all. But I found this statistic interesting. I actually dug this up. This isn't a statistic I found. I actually just did the math. In 2016, $68.3 billion was spent by the American government on the NEA, which is Arts and Humanities, so it was paying artists and historians and whatever to do work. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, NASA, of course, MPS, which is the National Park Service, so all of our parks and recreational areas, the National Science Foundation, NSF, and NIH, which is the National Institute of Health. And half of that actually was spent by the NIH alone. To contrast, the U.S. military spent $597 billion at that same time. So those organizations spent $68 billion.
Right.
The U.S. military spent $597 billion. The world spent $1.5 trillion on the military. Which means...
I just like I like that it like for the audience at home it looks like you're reading fact and figures, but it's just a giant printed out tweet.
It's my tweet.
That was nice.
And do you mind? I'm gonna need to be able to see it.
Wait, when you say the world spent on militaries in general of different countries,
right? The United States spent 1/3
the UK spend more money on our military.
The United States spent 1/3 of the entire global budget on military.
Got it. Okay.
And outspent the next 10 combined. And that
we gotta keep that big military, right?
We have 4% of the world population.
Gotta keep starting those wars.
So what I'm curious about is if you guys have a philosophical kind of take on this, and how do you feel about the idea of the American government actually functioning as a corporation, and say finding, like, I had this idea, I was talking about this with someone, just to set it up, see what you guys think. I was like, what if the government found 100 very smart scientists of different ilks? You got roboticists, you got biologists, you got astrophysicists, all sorts of things. They send proposals into a small bureaucracy that that they're like, I want to do this. If I just had a few $1 million, I could do this. And the government's like, fine, just hire them all, pay them all an exorbitant fee to retain them for a few years, give them a space to work in, and all of the resources they want, dump a few $1 billion into this. And maybe one or two of them will come up with something that, like, whatever they do, we own.
Right.
And then we can extract that investment, similar to how, and a lot of people don't know, the American military invented the internet. That wasn't done by a private corporation. That wasn't done by anyone else. Yeah, we would have eventually gotten to that point, but actually ARPANET and DARPANET and all those things were made by the American military. The very internet that we use today is the very internet that was created by the American government.
Yeah.
So by Al Gore, exactly. So I'm curious what you guys think about those two ideas, and if we should kind of withdraw from those things based on philosophy, or put money into them. And if it's important that we do those things as a society, remembering, of course, that we landed on the moon, spending an exorbitant amount of money back then, unfathomable. It would be almost $1 trillion actually today, which is a lot of money.
In 1969.
In 1969, that's exactly correct. Over this long period of time, 17 Apollo missions, but we did that as a society, and we put our flag into the moon.
Yeah.
And said that we did this together. So how do you guys feel about all of that?
I mean, in general, I think we spend way too much money on the military. I think our priorities in that regard could be a little bit more rejiggered. I love the fact that we still have a national endowment for the arts, even though I don't know necessarily what that means. And I don't think we should cut that. I think we should spend more money on health services and park services and things like that. On the note of the government becoming a business, I think there's an argument to be made that it's already there. Given that all of our representatives are backed by huge lobbyists like Big Pharma, and that would terrify me even more, because when you start to break down Big Pharma's policies, as far as, what was that story? I think it was like 6 months ago about that guy who was trying to sell an AIDS pill for
Kelly or whatever his name is. He's a real piece of shit apparently. He also bought that Wu-Tang record that they put out.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah, so I mean that level of profiteering kind of scares me a little bit. Like I don't know that we're that far away from it with our current administration being in office right now, and some of the things that Trump's doing. But yeah, I think that there should be an altruistic side to the government to some degree, right? And that it should be working for the people, not necessarily to make a profit off of the people. Given the fact, especially that we fund this, right? So it's one of those things like how would that necessarily work if all the taxpayers were paying these? I mean, that's all our money that's going presumably toward all this research, right? So do we get a cut of that? If so, I'm in.
Yeah, I think the argument you make, I think government is supposed to be altruistic and typically does run in that sense. I think the big question there are twofold. One is what you brought up, and the other, so if the money's invested, let me back up. What would be interesting is if the government said, hey, we're going to chase a cure for cancer. Which is a nebulous thing. We're going to chase a cure for cancer. We're going to invest a ton of money in it. Like just a ton of money. We're gonna recruit the greatest scientists, give them the greatest resources, greatest facilities, and they're gonna get it. If we get it, this is what the budget looks like 10 years from now, and this is how much your taxes are gonna go down. Because we're gonna take the money that we made on it, and we're gonna just bomb taxes like to the ground.
Sure.
But if it doesn't work, then this is what's on the books and what we owe. In other words, it's not really. It's just an interesting idea of how government might be able to function. The bigger philosophical question is if the American government founded the cure for cancer and then started charging everyone for it.
Yeah, that'd be
like how the government's like, we have it, we know how to do it.
That's what would happen. There's no way around that, right?
Well, whoever comes up with a cure for cancer is going to charge for it.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's like Pfizer is going to charge for it. So is it really that wrong for the American government to do it?
I mean, I feel like it is.
I agree.
Yeah, I feel like it's just because, like, based on what you're saying, it's just like the moment, especially when our tax dollars are going towards funding this and stuff, it's just like giving them that level of control where it's like you have to buy stuff. And I guess even now you have to buy, like, with all, like, healthcare and stuff, right? Like, with them not providing, you still need to pay for these services. I don't know, it gets complicated. These numbers are interesting to me because while I also don't agree that this much should be going towards the military, I am shocked that much is going towards those things. Like, $70 billion, obviously a lot of money, not as much compared to 600, but that's still a much higher percentage than I would. If you just asked me how much I think, I would not think it's that high.
Yeah, it's worth noting that NIH, which is the National Institute for Health, they research cures and all those kinds of things, spent half of it. The NEA spent less than $1 billion of it. So the number is a little misleading.
I don't mind that.
But even then, like, them spending over, I believe that health is way more important than arts. And I feel like there has to be like a hierarchy to all of this stuff. And like, I do believe that arts are important, but it really comes down to, okay, but how important are they compared to people's well-being and all these other things? And I think that even the idea of, let's say, a percentage of it, like 20 billion, 10 billion. Like how much needs to go towards these things, right? And I feel like there's also so many other things. And at the end of the day, I think that art is like, I'm doing this for the love type of thing. And if it's not starting there, then it's going to end up being for business and stuff. And if it's for business and shit, then it's in a different category. So it's like, I don't need it to be funded if you're doing it just for the money of it, if that makes sense.
I think an interesting, a more interesting question, or another interesting question would be, what would the world look like if those were switched, right? What would our country, what would our landscape look like? What would our life
We'd
bad
be on
guys.
Mars. We'd have cures to all sorts of disease. If not only this 1 year spending, but let's say we had a 20-year trend
Over
of
the last
spending this
20
much.
years, we decided, hey, you know what, we're gonna be isolationists. We're not gonna try to invest in wars.
There'd be
in other
hundreds of people
countries.
on Mars. There would be cures for things that we couldn't possibly imagine.
You'd all be speaking Russian though. They would have come over.
I don't know. We would have cured all their
Well,
cancer.
I made this point in a subsequent.
We would have given them all ours.
that we could cut the military in half, give these people twice as much money if you wanted to, just as a theory, and still cut the budget by $150 billion.
Yeah.
That's how much money, like literally give all of them twice as much money, cut half of the military budget, and we still save money. That's how much, and like not an inconsequential amount of money either, $100-something billion a year. That's 15% of the deficit, not the debt, the deficit, two different things. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Greg? Do you have a philosophical kind of take on this?
I mean, I'm with everybody that's been talking so far. I think I definitely think we should be supporting the arts, the sciences, the humanities. I think we should be doing more of that. I think that's what we should be encouraging. I think we should be a culture that puts that at the forefront of something that matters to us. You know what I mean? I don't think it's lost on people, myself included, that, you know, like, I think people are more interested in celebrity gossip and in video games and in distractions and quote unquote time wasters and things like that. Or, you know, not that I'm putting down any of the art forms we all enjoy, but I do think there is a giant disconnect between reading Grapes of Wrath and watching Honey Boo Boo. And I think the fact that more people are willing to do that and that's more accepted, and reality TV is okay to watch as your primary source of entertainment, and that's all you're engaging in, it's all you're thinking about. And I'm not trying to be on a high horse in an ivory tower. Obviously, I enjoy that stuff too. I enjoy comics and all this different stuff. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I think the fact that values have gone a little wacky in terms of what matters and what we need to champion and where we need to be. And I think you see that when you look at the fact of how easy it was in this last cycle for fake news to infect everything and fuck everything up, and people not be able to want, number one, to read past a headline, and number two, not be able to vet things like that. And I think this is all tied into the same thing of that we're a culture that right now doesn't value education. And I'm part of the problem, I think, in some respects for sure. But I think that it's reflected by the government in some ways, and maybe that's a pot kettle, maybe that's a cart before the horse, maybe it's the government reflecting its people, maybe it's the people reflecting its government, something to that effect. But I'd like to see us do more of that, and I think we could drop this military number by quite a bit and not have it be the end of the world and end times.
But it's a fascinating. Your original question, by the way, is very fascinating, because when you start to break down, you start to ask yourself why the military budget is so big. It's obvious. The answer is obvious, right? It's because that's where a lot of the profits built into. There's a ton of profit in war. It's the military-industrial complex, all that jazz. So the question becomes, if you then were to offset that with there being a bigger margin in another area, what would that do to the military? How would that change our foreign policy? You know, like what?
It would change it in a significant way.
Drastically,
It would bring us back to, I mean, if we cut the military budget, which I would love to cut the military budget by even like 3/5 or more. Now that's my personal stance, but it's because we have, you know, you have to look at it. If you told someone in military apparatus at the Pentagon that, they'd fucking shriek in horror, because they see a different world in which the United States needs to maintain these bases in all these countries. You ever see pay attention out there. If you ever see a U.S. Navy or U.S. Air Force or U.S. military or Marines commercials, whatever, especially the Navy commercial, at the very end, they'll show a logo and pan out on a map. If you freeze it, I've done it. If you freeze on the map,
Is that where all the bases
there are
are?
stars all over the globe. Those are where all of our bases are. Now ask yourself this question, everywhere, fucking everywhere. Ask yourself this question. How would you feel if Russia had a base in, say, Tallahassee? How would you feel if the Chinese had a base in San Jose? Now, we literally have our military, our sovereign military fighting force in Germany, in Japan, in England, a bunch of African countries, Kuwait, Turkey. You know, we have them even in Canada. You know, we have them all over the place.
Well, someone's got to watch those Canadians.
They're wily.
And you have to
Them and the Central
you
Time
have to
people.
ask yourselves like Donald Trump is on to something interesting, I think, with one of these particular things, which he's saying NATO particularly, like we pay for NATO. Like basically, people that know NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is basically designed to keep the Russians away from Western Europe. That's the entire idea of it since the Soviet Union era. But we're basically the bulk of the fighting force. We pay the bulk of the money. Article 5 is the important part of NATO, which says like attack on one and is an attack on all. Yet we are the ones that do all of the heavy lifting financially and all that kind of stuff. And his whole thing is like, you guys have to start paying, you know? And that's an interesting thing being like, well, if we're going to station guys in say Poland to just scare the Russians a little bit so they don't roll into their fucking country, then maybe you guys should be paying for it, you know? And I think that could do put a dent in it. But I do think the bigger thing is a philosophical,
This looks like an outbreak map.
It does. It looks like a fucking
like so you can
Bases,
see
pads,
here
and
the yellow
unconfirmed.
circle around Europe. That's all just
More than
NATO
100
and
bases. Wow. Okay.
So the question is like, what does the world look like if we did that? And to me, it would look a lot like it did in I don't want to be dramatic about it because some people are like, we don't want the world to look like this, but it's going to look like the United States looked like in the 30s, which is to say like we didn't really, you know, it's what Theodore Roosevelt said decades before that about carrying a big stick. Like we have the greatest fighting force and the greatest technology the world has ever known in the American military. No one touches anything we do. No one can possibly take us in a nuclear exchange. No one can possibly take us in a ground exchange or in an air or in the sea. We are untouchable. And we have been since World War II. There's no question about that. No one would ever fuck with us. If they could have, if the Soviets thought they could have taken us, they would have tried. For instance, you know, they didn't dare. And my whole argument is like, we can just remove ourselves from all these places. And if we need to go back to Iraq or we need to inject ourselves, we'll go. Like no one's going to stop us from trying to inject ourselves back into those countries.
But I think the fear becomes then like what happens if you have a 5 or 10 year, gap where we're not having a stranglehold in those countries, right? Do we lose footing? Do we lose footing? Do we lose the ability to have the most amount of aircraft carriers, right?
We could, but we could still have the numbers. We just don't need to deploy them, you know, like
right.
So we're getting away from the philosophical thing because the philosophical thing I want to say about this is what's important about not being tied down by orthodoxy. People look at me and they're like, well, you're a libertarian, so how can you believe in protectionism? Or you're a small government guy, so how can you believe in science investment? And I'm like, because I don't believe in orthodoxy. I believe in small bureaucracies, and I believe in a federal government apparatus, as Grover Norquist said, that you can drown in a bathtub. That's how small it is. And I think that that's a great way to look at the government. That doesn't mean the government has no function or that the government can't do great things or important things. It's a matter of how the money's used and scaling the bureaucracy down so the money gets to where it needs to go. And that's what's most important. So with this kind of stuff, I look at it and I'm like, well, NASA does important stuff and they only get $20 billion a year, and that's really not a lot of money to work with. Could they work in concert with some of the private corporations like SpaceX and others to do great things? And the answer is yes. And I look at something like NIH and I'm like, they can invest in more scientists and doctors to find the next great cure for a disease that we can proliferate around the world, as we have already done. A lot of the great medical technology in the world comes from American companies. So could you take some of the pharmaceutical talent there and put them to work with the government and scale down the bureaucracy to let them do what they need to do? I have no problem with the government spending money. I have a problem with how the government spends money. And that's an important differentiator. It's
a good distinction.
And so I think it's something interesting, whether the answer is right or wrong, is for people to think about, like, how can the government function in such a way to not only serve the benefit of the people, to not only pave the roads, to not only protect the airports and protect our space and all those kinds of things, but could the government also work for you? Yeah, could we also come together and be like, let's invest? You know, could the American government invest in Tesla?
Yeah.
You know, and then we can all benefit, and they take that money back and they're like, hey guys, we put just a small amount of money, $1 billion into Tesla. We made a nice rip of a couple $100 million over the last few years on our investment in Tesla. We're going to now fund the arts with that money.
Yeah.
So it's not going to come out of your tax dollars. Can we have a government that works smart and efficiently and does lots of cool things without getting in your face? Because my big thing is I don't want the government involved in your business. That doesn't mean the government doesn't have to be involved in any business. It just doesn't have to be involved in your business. It doesn't have to be involved in your life, who you're marrying, who you're fucking, what you're smoking, all those kinds of things. But could we do great things? Because we look at the moon and we said, we went there, you know? And I really do believe that when the Chinese inevitably go back to the moon and all these, and the new space races and invigorated, we're gonna be like, we wish we did this again. Like, that's what makes us great. Our art makes us American. Our entertainment makes us American. Our science makes us American. These are the things that define us. The Department of Energy doesn't make us American. It doesn't need to exist. The Department of Education doesn't need to exist. That should be happening at a state level. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be investing in things.
I mean, the
So-
real concern, though, comes down to, I agree with what you're pitching. That'd be awesome. But I feel that the concern comes down to what we touched on a second ago with what's happening now is just the fact that we can't trust the government. You know what I mean? I don't feel like I can trust the government. So I don't for a second think that I could sit there and be like, the government in this world is saying, all right, we're going to invest in businesses and it not be some backwater, underhanded, under the table. We're backing this business and it turns out they back this business because of X, Y, Z. This guy is in charge and that's you know what I mean? Like,
Oh, for sure. It's just a philosophical exercise.
Sure.
I don't think
Definitely.
you could ever get to that point. And I don't know that you could really even justify getting to that point because I think that, to your point, there's so many unsavory things going on, and then you don't really understand who's like tracking things and all this kind of stuff. And the private economy is what's the drives the American dream, and that should be left alone. But it's just to say, could we be smarter and more? And I looked at these numbers, and I was just pondering this for the last month or so because this tweet's old. This tweet's from the 21st of January, where I'm like, it's an interesting idea. Why isn't the government smarter?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to necessarily be leaner. It just needs to be smarter. And can we pay down the debt by making wise investments? Mind you, we owe $20 trillion.
Yeah.
$20
not that bad.
trillion. That is,
not that
let me put it this way.
Just launch a Patreon.
Yeah, whatever.
If the American government paid for nothing, but collected the amount of taxes that it collects right now, which is to the tune of like $3.5 trillion a year or so, it would take the government 7 years to pay back the debt without paying for anything else other than servicing the debt and servicing both the principal and the interest on the debt. We owe so much money that we're gonna have to find clever solutions in the next few decades to pay it back, or we are gonna be fucked. Because anyone that runs around saying sovereign debt should always be this high is nuts. The sovereign debt is many times higher than even GDP. You know, like, so could we find a clever solution to say like, hey, NASA, here's $50 billion. We want you to go do all these cool things. You might want to figure out how to mine that asteroid in the next 20 years and we can take that metal and sell it on the market.
Yeah.
We're
But
not saying this is going to save the country, but it might save the country.
saying there's some fuel up on the moon. Let's scrape that surface.
Like, what if the government was just like, hey, there's a lot of nickel and aluminum on that asteroid and we were going to target it and we're going to sell it. We're going to flood the market, you know, with it to pay some of our debt. It's an interesting idea.
That's
cool.
fascinating.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
But I don't know the principal philosophy. Like,
But it's one of those things that you can't that's a great philosophical idea, but you can't do that in principle. When was our Secretary of State was the head of used to be the CEO of Exxon?
Tillerson,
Yeah,
Rex Tillerson.
So like we're probably not going to invest in battery power or Tesla anytime soon with him with him on the cabinet. You know.
Yeah.
But what are
Anyway,
you gonna do?
just an idea. I want people. I want to stress like it's fun to play these mental exercises. I often play with them by myself because I'm always alone. Of just
you're not the
thinking
only one.
about new ways to go about your business.
Yeah.
And
fascinating.
new ways to pay off our debt, and new ways to invest, and new ways to do things, and to not be tied down by small government or big government or who cares. Look at each thing as they are and figure out a way that I can talk to you for 5 hours about how the government can both be small and out of your business and actually invest just as much money as it's investing now, way smarter for a return.
Sounds like an extra life part. 5 hours with Colin.